Hello and welcome to the Q&A for In the Meantime. We're very fortunate to have the filmmaker director here, Nicholas Anthony. Nicholas, how you doing?
Good, thank you, Jason. Thanks for letting me come onto the Zoom meeting and have a good chat with you about the film.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. Glad to have you here. Where are you calling in from?
Melbourne, Australia, on a sunny Wednesday morning.
Oh my goodness, you're a little bit ahead of me. Okay, well,
Yeah.
welcome. Welcome from San Francisco and the SF Indie Fest. Tell us about this film. Very interesting, very unique and different. I found it very interesting to watch these two female characters, or the main character. What inspired you to make this movie?
It's kind of strange. The way it kind of came about was from a original kind of short film that I did in 2017 and sort of explore that idea of awkwardness in a more comedic sense, and then building from that this idea of I don't know. We all kind of land in this existential kind of limbo sometimes, and I started to gravitate towards these different ideas over the, from like 2018, 2019 onwards, and just building that sort of story up. And you know, there's a lot of personal sort of elements to the story as well that it just will bleed into the film itself, especially as it's my debut sort of feature film.
Oh, okay.
My thing has always been I don't want it to think that my life is interesting, which actually is also a part of the film as well, where it's just like I don't think Max doesn't feel like her life goes anywhere. It's not interesting, and everyone else has these amazing, cool lives, and she's just stuck. Which I think a lot of people feel, and
Yeah, yeah.
you know,
I appreciated like when she, was comparing herself to her friend, and her friend's just
yeah,
everything's going right. We all have
yeah,
people
yeah.
like that in our life that we compare ourselves to and get frustrated by.
Exactly. And there might be people who are close to us as well. So it's that has that extra level of like, tension or sort of even like a sense of guilt or shame that we sort of have because we feel that way towards someone we care about. But uh, and one of the things as well, like for better or for worse, like the pandemic kind of really accelerated the relevance of the film and provided that sense of how to feel when you have the sense of isolation that surrounds you. Sometimes it can be forced upon you. Sometimes it's self-inflicted. And I've talked about the film a lot, and I always feel like I when someone asks me what the film's about and how it can be, it always feels like I'm providing a different explanation. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I think it just kind of shows the evolution of like how we've seen the film evolve over the last 3 or 4 years. Like, for me, I always looked at it as like it's not my story, it's not really my film. Like I just happened to stumble upon this story, and everyone else who's come on board for it, from Bronte Charlotte, who plays the lead, and she's also the producer with me on this film, to Dominica Garrett, who plays Emma, and Jane Sean, who plays Sam, but she's also the script and performance consultant, and she basically like co-directed the film with me. From those three all the way to like Emily Mayorino and Lee Scully and these people who sort of like were there all the way through it, all the way to people who were there for like one day or one part of filming. We wanted to make sure that it was like their story that they could kind of see themselves, because every time I told people like what the film was about, they were like, oh, that's me, and I kind of, so I felt like a responsibility, and then we all did, to sort of make sure that we guided this film to that point where we were able to sort of, when we showed it to people, they would feel that they could see themselves in it in whatever way that possibly could
Right,
be.
right. Well, we'll all, audience members interpret movies differently. They all interpret it in their
Yeah,
own way. But if you have universal themes or relevant themes, they'll be able to connect to it. Um,
exactly.
did you, since you're an artist and a filmmaker, and those that character kind of goes through these things that artists go through a lot. Like, what am I doing? What's this for? Who am I writing this for? Making this. Did you have some sort of cathartic experience finishing the film? Did anything happen for you personally? Uh, Completing the
I
film?
always have this, yeah, I always have this strange kind of, it's not really a story, it's more of an anecdote. Most of my stories are anecdotes. Like they kind of don't, they just end somewhere.
Anecdotes are good. That's good.
Yeah. Like we finished the final day of shooting, and it was like a block of shooting for like 3 weeks, which was like the second block of shooting in our winter here in June, July. And we were shooting, and it was like a fun kind of interesting kind of sequence of scenes that we could put together. And we were doing the takes and the takes, and I said cut, and Jane said to me, "Is that it?" I'm like, "Yeah, I think that's it. Like, I think we wrapped the film." So that kind of weird. I didn't feel relief. I was just like, I think we're done. And like it was like a strange kind of feeling that, like, even though we had post production, like that sense of like when you sort of complete something that you don't, you want to complete it, but the idea of finishing it is just you don't really have that mentality yet. You're just going through the days and trying to just get that each little thing done. So when we got to the end, I was like, oh, okay, that's it. I
Well,
think we're
have you ever heard that expression in filmmaking where you never really finish a film, you just kind of let it go, you just kind of give
yes,
birth to it, but it's never really done,
yeah,
right?
exactly. So that was where I was like, hey, we've completed that, and once we finished post production, I was like, that's it. I feel like we can move on now from it. It's I had this itch to keep working, so like which means that I think I need to make my next film, because if
Yeah,
I don't, then I'll keep tinkering with this film. So,
right.
that idea of
Yeah,
moving away, and
yeah.
for me, it's like now the sense of like, okay, it's great for the audience can see it now, that this is
Yeah.
what it is for them.
You put it out there, it's done. It's for the audiences
Yes,
to enjoy. Uh,
exactly.
and so, like, was the script like? Did you stick to the script really tightly, or was it kind of looser, or did it improv? How was
Um,
the production?
Yeah, so the script, I initially for me, I thought it was going to be much tighter. Like it was going to be, we'd really stick to the script. I had this idea of it being sort of like real machine gun like back and forth with the dialogue, and there is a lot of that still in there. But um, I always credit Bronte and Dom with how they were developing their characters and their own rehearsals that they were doing together. And then when we would do our sort of broader rehearsals, seeing the more kind of improvisation, whatever that word is,
Yeah,
that sort of style of like, okay, I need to shift with them. I can't force them into that box that I thought we would be in.
yeah.
And so the script, while it sort of remained quite uh, the scenes and the filming remained quite faithful to the script. There was much more room for that improvising, and
Because
we kind of
it
evolved.
has a very loose improvisational kind of feel
Yes,
towards it, and it jumps around in relation to the characters jumping around. So it feels very kind of just free flowing. Talk about that jumping around. I didn't quite understand it. What
yeah,
it even opens up with some words that she's in the bathtub breaking down, and I think they talk about like you know did you jump around again, or are you jumping around?
yeah.
And then you do it with the editing too throughout the movie. What is that representing? What's going on there?
So this film is there's a lot of inspiration with French New Wave film, and also like specifically the filmmaking, like the production process of it. Breathless is kind of a big influence there specifically. So
Yeah.
that sort of jumping around, that kind of leaping, those jump cuts, that sort of like jolt the audience through time and jolt Max through time, sort of leads us to that sense of like almost like a sense of discombobulation and uh,
I
this
see that.
this lack of kind of grounding in the film, and like another layer of uncertainty to how her life is kind of unfolding over the course of a year.
Yeah.
And it creates that sense of like tension about like how trustworthy is her narrative, like how trustworthy are her memories, like and again, like it's one of those things where I wanted to put it in there, because I had that sort of those sorts of ideas, but I also wanted to kind of at least provide that opportunity for the audience to interpret, that kind of feel, that sort of jolting editing
Yeah,
that we
yeah,
sort
it
of.
works well now that you put it that way too. I mean, because it exactly did that. It put me in the main character's kind of head.
Yes.
I was like, what, and that's how she felt. Makes sense to me. Yeah, well done. And then I can see reference, the homage to Breathless and French New Wave for sure. Um, and and then you just mentioned like over the course of the year. So I was wondering why you put the seasons too. You start with winter, end with winter, right? And
Yes. Yeah.
why did you use it? Why did you break it down into
Uh,
seasons? And also talk about you put quotes in there from famous quotes.
yes. Yeah, yeah. So the winter, the having the seasons come up, I think just provided a sense of uh clarity in the movement. I kind of like, seeing them as like chapters in a book.
Yeah.
Just felt like another little layer to sort of like make the film more dense, provide that sense of time flowing, but also in a way that the way that they came up, I'm just sort of thinking about this now, is there's a sort of stability to how those seasons come through. Yeah.
You just clarified that for me too. I just realized that provided storytelling structure for me, even though the characters going all over the place. I'm like, where
All
are
over
we?
the place.
But then you brought
Yeah.
us back, so there's actually
Yeah.
quite good that you structured it that way, and for me at least.
Yeah, and I guess like because the when it ends, how it ends, having that kind of loop close sort of kind of gives a reasoning, a stronger reason as to why those the seasons come up. As for the quotes, I had a whole bunch of them ready to go, but then some of them just sort of stood out more than others, and obviously the four that we put in there. The David Bowie one from Life on Mars was, I mean, I love that song, and so um, just that first line, "It's a god awful small affair," just it kind of sums up the film in a
Mhm.
lot of ways. It's so a lot of the stuff can sometimes feel so heavy upon one's soul or mind, but it's also something that's quite you know pedantic and trivial. That Simone de Beauvoir quote at the start as well is almost like an opening kind of like, I don't know, uh, MO or the thesis towards the film. I don't know, I'm getting a little bit too filmy academic here, but
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, but that sort of sense of like, using those quotes kind of structure and provide, not so much a sense of context, but just like an idea for the audience to utilize that line or that quote and how it fits or how it can flow within the film itself or
Yeah,
the narrative
yeah.
or the thematic sort of workings of the film.
Right, right. Yeah, I like it. And then the first quote is about becoming a woman or being a woman, right? I'm not familiar with it, but
Yeah.
yeah. Well, you
Oh,
don't need
man,
to you don't need to remember it, but because I can't remember. But so how what I mean, you wrote basically about female characters, a female lead, and then
yeah.
directed. How did that come about? Like how are you able
Um,
to do that?
I look, I for some reason, and I still don't quite know how to answer it, is that I feel more comfortable writing female characters.
Ah, cool.
I'm not against writing like male characters or non-binary or trans or anything like that if the story calls for it, and being able to respect that sort of gender and the people who identify as that.
Mhm.
With this film, because it was also kind of a sense of like an autobiographical thing and a very universal kind of story with Max, it became something where who Max was as a person came first, and their gender kind of like filtered through into that. And I always, everyone on the film basically is from a female or non-binary background, and that sort of makes it more important to have their voices really influence where it was. So like the script where it was initially becomes more and more because they are in it,
Yeah.
especially Bronte, like her encapsulating Max allows me to it allows the film to go further than it ever could, because she's bringing this innateness to the film. She's bringing this sort of like sense of like familiarity and more and more respect and sort of knowledge to it than I ever could. So that allows the film to sort of break through kind of the normal kind of barriers that you might sort of see, and everyone feels like it's their thing. They take ownership of it, so it's not them sort of enacting my vision, it's them enacting their own vision and trying to tell their own story with it. There are barriers, there are things where you kind of want to you really need to respect. Like I remember Jane saying something about like one of the scenes they were supposed to walk home at night through a park, and in my head, I didn't think too much about it, but then Jane was like, probably not the safest thing for women to do, and things like that. It's just, because in my head it sounded like a really cool scene and really interesting visually, but that realistic, like being truthful to the realism and the voice of characters, from whatever background they are, whatever identity they are, is
Yeah.
so important. I don't, it's not always that we're going to get it right, and maybe there's parts of the film where I feel like it could have been better, but at the same time, it's just that intent to continue to try to strive for that, and especially with a film like this as well.
Yeah, it's super important. I hate nothing more than when something is not, you're taken out of a story or a movie because the character wouldn't do that. It's like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, agreed completely. And then how much did the actors bring to their characters and the story in the movie?
So much more than I could ever have possibly imagined. As I said before, like Bronte and Dom were just astounding in the way that they brought their characters to life. And some of my favorite reactions from people have been like how electric and how dynamic their chemistry is on screen, and how it shifts across the entirety of the film. And a lot of that credit has to go to Jane Sean as well, just the way that she allowed these characters to sort of flourish and develop and become real. I think, like it's very hard
Yeah,
in some ways. Sometimes it feels very, indie films can feel sometimes you get either way too caustic in its reality, and sometimes it becomes way too uh indie cool, and you don't quite feel like you're getting the right balance between it. But I think we got it there. Even
yeah,
like, and everyone else, all the supporting parts as well, was the same thing, where I wanted them to feel like, bring as much as you possibly can to it. I want to improvise on set. I want to feel like, how are you doing this specific line, this action, this movement, and how can I help to improve that through the way that the cameras, the framing, the composition, that sort of
yeah.
stuff. And that was where it became a very synergistic sort of thing, a very massive collaborative effort, because I just don't want people to feel like their ideas or their thoughts or their suggestions are falling on deaf ears, because we do have the opportunity to be very open to that. And even if it doesn't go to a point where you follow that idea that can unlock another thread that can push something to somewhere else that you never would have thought of before. So that was something that I was very thankful for.
Yeah, yeah, and provides you said the word realness. It's like it is that you do feel like you're really in these characters. Cinema verite. You feel like you're there with them just by happenstance. I love the scene, a couple scenes, but like on the street with the drag queens. I mean, it's
Yes.
almost very New York City like, because that could
Oh,
happen.
okay.
You just also
Yeah.
you meet people and characters and community on the street, and you just you have a moment in time with them, and it was real.
Yeah. 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 That's the
Yeah,
thing. Like that was, yeah, that
yeah,
was something that was really fun to sort of, I always kind of wanted that scene in my head. I was like, I kind of want, so Betty and Ruby, I kind of want them to sort of be like their own story. Like
mhm.
if we followed them for a little bit, and also like
Yeah.
they kind of get bombarded by Max and Emma, and
Well,
just
that
how
was a great
they,
that was a great comedic moment. I love the line too. Like what she
yeah,
said, "Thank God that's over," or something
yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
Like just that idea of like, okay, like we've been following Max and Emma around, and we're kind of connected to them and their story and everything like that. But what if just two strangers had to deal with them for like 10 minutes or whatever? Like they would be kind of annoying. And so, seeing Betty and Ruby, and how they had to like endure Max and Emma, and they were,
But
light up and
the scene is sweet because all of them are sincere and authentic, as opposed to
yes.
that horrible date from hell that she's on with that guy.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
That's painful.
That was the first I that was the second last day of shooting when we did that scene, and that was the first. So we had shot for 35 or 36 days over the course of a few months or whatever, and that was the first time that Bronte cracked the entire time. Like, so Alexander Lloyd, who played Philip, just the way that all those scenes was put together, and those shots are just, Bronte couldn't hold it together, and it was perfect. It was a great way to kind of like get to that end of shooting, and that awkwardness, that sort of like that refusal to sort of like leave and like have a breath of like relief from that kind of,
Mhm.
you know uncomfortable date which we've all been on.
Yeah.
It's just, people can like sort of like have a shiver down the spine when they're watching that scene, but also kind of have a laugh as well about it.
We the audience with along with the character wanted to get off that date
Yes.
ASAP.
Exactly.
Uh,
But you can't sometimes. There's a politeness to it. You sort of have to just endure it for as long as possible.
uh-huh. Well, endure with the red wine as she did.
Yes, exactly.
And then where did you shoot this?
So I shot it all in Melbourne.
And
And
what kind of impact or influence did that have on the movie, on the story, on shooting?
so I I moved to Melbourne in the start of 2017. So I'm originally from Brisbane. So I've been here for almost 7 years now, and I just found the city very cinematic, but it's never really felt cinematic on screen. It's felt like a place that could, have its own identity. And I wanted to bring that to the fore through the film, but through the eyes of these characters. I
Mhm.
didn't want it to make it, so films like Francis Ha, Manhattan, even like Stranger Than Paradise, um,
Mhm.
films that kind of um, provided a sense of time and place.
Yeah,
Not so
yeah,
much making the film a character, sorry,
the
the
location.
city a character in the film, but just like this weight upon the film itself being the city that we are using. And I just wanted to get this ground level view of Melbourne, like how people who
Yeah,
live here feel, like there are landmarks that you see, but they're in the background. We don't really, no one goes to place like, we don't do tourist stuff. You live here, you know what I mean? Like we just
yeah.
out and
Yeah,
get
well,
annoyed
I
sometimes.
can see your influences, if you will. You know, the movie Manhattan, Stranger Than Paradise, Francis Ha. I can feel that. I can see it.
Mm.
So, and I love that. I love when location or when the place is a character as well. I think
Yeah, and not letting it dominate the film itself, but complement the film.
yeah, yeah. You don't want it to become a tourism
Yes.
video, right?
Which we
Uh,
tend to always do here in Australia. We just tend to feel like we have to put in these landmarks that sort of show like this is who we are. It's like I don't no one cares.
right, right. Well, it's a very Hollywood thing to do, right? Too to go and
Yes.
show, San Francisco or New York
Yeah,
skyline or
yeah,
whatever.
exactly.
Um, well, that's cool. And then to get a little geeky, techie filmmaker-ish,
Go
you
for it.
shot on a phone.
We did shoot on a phone,
Wow.
iPhone 13 Pro Max. The guy tried to upsell me on a phone plan, which I was like, I don't need that. I've already got a phone. So, I just need this to film a movie.
The
So
phone is a camera in this case. It's not an app. It's not a phone.
yeah, exactly. So we shot on that. I had options to shoot on DSLR cameras and some other film cameras as well. But for this and to sort of affordability wise, it was a really strong thing to do, and also just it gave us more flexibility with how to shoot it. And the freedom to sort of like shoot as much as we possibly could without needing to sort of like do a lot of like big laborious setups because the film is very dynamic and kind of fleet of foot sometimes. So you need to be ready to go.
Well,
So
nowadays
yeah,
we're way more accepting of that. The technology's there, so as
yes,
long as the acting, the story, the script's good, you're not distracted by what kind of camera.
exactly.
But
Yeah.
what you said it provided flexibility. Like, what were some of the advantages that it brought for you?
Um, so just sort of like immediately sort of like getting into a scene, immediately kind of like, oh, we could like, because sometimes it would shoot and we wouldn't have a specific location. We'd have a general idea of where the location was. So we would go there and then we would just sort of go, okay, this looks good. And then we would shoot it like, just, we
Without
like,
permission, really? Like you would just kind of steal
no,
it?
no, we would just, well, we have this, there's a law here where like if you have six or less people filming, you don't need permits and stuff like that. So we just sort of like made sure we had six or less people. Sometimes we did that, but that's okay.
We
We
won't
got
tell.
through it. So
Yeah, I'll not
that's,
tell.
just cut that out if you need to. But yeah, like this idea of just it maybe there was like a more of a psychological thing, but sometimes I felt like just the idea of having it there without feeling like you needed to put all these things together. And look, like we used, we bought lenses from Sandmark to sort of like anamorphic lenses and stuff like that to use on the film, and used a Filmic Pro to shoot it and all that sort of stuff. So had all the things that we could use, but again, just easy and convenient, but also not losing the quality that we wanted for it. And it kind of felt like we weren't as intrusive in the
Sure.
city and around locations. Because if you have like even like a a simple DSLR, and you might have like a long tele lens and stuff like that, and you might have a bit of a rig going, like it starts to get a little bit too like people are going to notice. People are going to kind of like you won't have that kind of looseness to it, and the actors won't they'll feel too exposed
Yeah.
sometimes. And
Yeah.
so like we just had to, because everyone uses their phone, everyone shoots on their phone,
I know.
everyone film like they're filming everything, so we don't stand out as much. And that was something I really kind of wanted to just
Yeah.
feel like we were kind of within the fabric of the city as we we're telling the story.
Right, right. Yeah, I think you captured that. Maybe also because of the technology used. Now, was there any disadvantages, any cons to using the phone? I
um
mean, I can be a little critical with like the visual imagery. If you want to
yeah,
be
yeah.
geeky, you can point out like, oh, there's some things, but it's
Yeah, I think the cons for it, in terms of like sometimes the night shooting was a little bit difficult to do, and maybe the the actual pro of being flexible and kind of shooting whenever you want can turn into a bit of a con when you're not quite thinking as much
mm,
as you probably could. Like I was thinking a lot about shots, and everyone who would come on board would sort of do suggestions as well. Like Jane would help out in that and everything. But sometimes like that kind of ability just to like shoot could almost like lead to like not having the necessary preparation for it. Things like that. Just to sort of, you know,
you can overshoot. Remember
yeah, 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 exactly. And
when
also like
digital
the
first
idea of
came
like,
around, like we always
yeah,
overshot, right?
exactly. So and I sort of became aware of that sort of like when after we finished shooting, and that's one of those things where it's like, oh, I know what to do. I can take those lessons into the next film, whether we
Mhm.
use a phone again or sort of like upgrade to another thing. But yeah, and also just like the idea of like those limitations of not sort of like needing permission to do things kind of like rushed us a little bit sometimes. But
Mhm.
I don't mind imperfections. I don't mind that sense of just like a incompleteness to like what it could have been, because there's again a sense of like rawness and immediacy to it that if we tried to like mask over those things, I think it would make it a much lesser film. So we kind of lean into it more.
Yeah. Yeah. And then black and white. Talk about the choice of shooting or finishing in black and white,
Yeah.
and then you do have bits of color. Talk about that.
Yeah, yeah. So the black and white was something I hadn't thought of until a friend of mine, Tom Broadhurst, sort of like who was initially kind of on board at the start, because we had kind of talked about doing like a two-hander film in the midst of one of the lockdowns that we had here. And he was like, "Oh, I see it in black and white," and that kind of shifted my sort of whole idea of like how the film would look. And for me, the black and white, I personally look at it as a sense of black and white is an idea of memory that we kind of have. Like
Mhm.
we don't dream in black and white. We don't see anything in black and white in a lot of ways. But film was firstly in black and white, and it gives you a sense of the past,
Mhm.
and it can provide a sense of reconstructed memories. And the idea as well is that like, usually in a film like this, the black and white would be the flashbacks and the memories, like the color elements that are
Right.
actually in the
Right.
film, and the
Okay.
color would be the main thing of it. I had a friend of mine who watched it, and they said, her friends, her name's Carolyn. She said that it felt like the black and white was like Max thinking or believing that her present has no color, and has no life to it. It's sort of like this void. And that was something I found really interesting. And I think as well, like black and white just gives us a sense of like pulling it out of contemporary times as much as possible. I didn't want it to feel, yeah, as
Yeah.
like something from 2023 or something like that. I wanted to feel like it could be almost, something from the 60s or 70s.
Well, then also again, I see the reference or homage to French New Wave, to
Mm,
the Manhattan movie, things like that. And then
yes.
back to what your friend Carolyn said too, how you end the movie in color. So that makes sense that now Max is kind of maybe she made it through another year.
Moving on. Yeah, like it's always like the thing that we sort of were landing on when it came to like how do we want this film to end was we want to get to a point where Max realizes that she's not okay, and that's the end of the film in a way. Like I think sometimes it's like a film has a little bit too much of a neat ending, and I think sometimes parts of it felt a little bit too tidy. But overall, I think we kind of almost landed it, nailed it. But that was the thing. Like we had a lot of people at some of the screenings here in Melbourne. They were they were loving where it was going, but they were also like unsure about how it was going to end. Like, are they going to land it? Is it going to be too, cliched and neat and stuff like that? But they really enjoyed how it sort of ended the way it ended, because it didn't feel like this sort of like everything's fine now, she's okay. It's like she's not okay. She had to realize that she's not okay, and then that can provide her a sense of continuing to move forward with whatever issues that she might have. Because again, like when you're living this life, you don't have an end. You don't have things tied up in a little bow. Like it takes a long time to sort of like accept things and then to actually address and deal with those things, which again amplified with everything that's happened over the last 3 or 4 years. So we utilize that sort of element of a cathartic ending that felt like a beginning of something else.
Yeah, and you used the word earlier in this Q&A. I think you said truthful, and
Yes.
I think you captured that. It's a very truthful
Yeah.
movie and truthful to the characters in the story, right?
Yeah. We really sort of made sure we kept that as our priority throughout.
Right on. Well, it's a sweet little film. We really like it, and so happy you
Glad you
made
do.
it. Yeah, well done.
Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you very much.
And anything else you want to add before I sign off? That's all I have for us.
I don't know. Just I hope it helps people to see what's possible with the resources that you might have around. If you want to make movies, make movies.
Right.
That's the most important thing when it comes to like having that experience. And I hope it sort of connects and engages, and makes people feel something when they watch it. So
Yeah,
that's about
right
it.
on. It did for us here in San Francisco.
That's
So thank you.
fantastic.
Yeah, congratulations. That's all the time we
Very
have.
much. Thank
Thanks
you.
for making the movie. Thanks for joining us, Nicholas. People, thanks for watching another Q&A. Check out more great independent cinema at sfindie.com. Bye, everybody.
So yeah.
And I'm going to hit stop recording as soon as I can find that button. There it is.